Welcome back to another episode of Out of the Blank Podcast. I'm back here with Scott. Scott, it's a pleasure to have you back on the show. I hope that group discussion we had wasn't a lot. It seemed like a lot because there's a lot of information in there, but I wanted to have you back on to discuss a name that is more likely the person that took the shot at General Walker. A lot of people in the JFK community will know General Walker, the shooting getting blamed on Lee Harvey Oswald. And if you haven't listened to our panel discussion on General Walker, I recommend listening to that. But Scott, can you please introduce yourself to everyone out there listening, and then also a little background on who Duff was?
Sure. Well, thanks, Robbie, first of all, for an invite back onto the show. That's much appreciated. I did have to go and have a lie down for a few hours after that epic call we were on a few weeks ago, but it was good fun. So thanks again for the invite. Yeah, I'm Scott Reid. I live in Glasgow, in Scotland, and I've been interested in the JFK assassination really since I was like just getting into my teens. I've just followed it all the way from there. Visited Dallas multiple occasions. Met lots of witnesses, researchers, etc. during those journeys. I'm a member of Dealey Plaza UK, so we have regular catch-ups to discuss the assassination, have guests on Zoom calls, etc. But the reason I'm really here today is to talk about somebody who, having read about the assassination for so many years, his name really only appeared on my radar about 5 or 6 years ago, and his name's William Duff. And a lot of people maybe not know who he is. And the reason I was interested in him is because he's a fellow Scotsman and was actually born only about 20 miles away from where I'm sitting here talking to you today. So that really interested me about a Scotsman finding his way into books, etc. I think it was The President and the Provocateur by Alex Cox, I think his name is, the author, where I first came across Duff's name about 5 or 6 years ago. And his name also then appeared in other books when I started looking up in the indexes, and I found that his name was coming up in certain books. And really, he's relevant in terms of General Edwin Walker, because he worked for General Edwin Walker for a period of time in late 1962 and early 1963. And he was basically let go by Walker about a month before the assassination attempt on General Walker, which took place on the 10th of April, 1963. And if you read the Warren Commission and other kind of lone gunman type publications, they will basically say that that Lee Harvey Oswald was responsible for the shot at General Walker, and there were no other suspects. But that's actually not true. William Duff was a suspect in the Walker shooting, and actually was investigated by the Dallas police and also General Walker himself, who initiated a private investigation. Uh, Duff's name's also mentioned. Some witnesses have said that they saw him in the company of Lee Harvey Oswald, and Duff also said that when he worked for General Walker, he saw Jack Ruby on a number of occasions coming in and out of the house. So there's other kind of strands to the Duff story, if you like, that hopefully we can get into.
I would like to ask about how Duff even arrived at General Walker's house and how he eventually, guess, became in employment with General Walker.
Yeah, it's quite an interesting story. I mean, first of all, I mean, Duffy was born in a town called Grangemouth, which, as I say, is about 20 miles away from where I am, and is kind of halfway between Glasgow and Edinburgh. And he was born there in 1931. Now, his father died in 1955, and some of Duff's siblings had moved to the USA, to California. I think maybe one or two of his sisters had moved to California. So in 1957, Duff decided that he was going to move. It seems like a lot of the family were moving from Scotland over to the States, and then on to California. He travelled over on in May 1957, and he travelled with his mother on an ocean liner called the Britannic. And he arrived in New York on May the 11th, and basically then moved on to California and hooked up with the rest of the family. Uh, so he's in California at this point. How does he find himself in Texas? Well, he joined the US Air Force for a couple of years. He'd only been in the States for about 6 months, and he joined the US Air Force, and he was in the Air Force for 2 years. But he received an undesirable discharge in December 1959. So he had his 2 year stint in the US Air Force. Uh, it wasn't without problems. From what I've been able to gather, he was court-martialed at one point in September 1959, and he received 30 days hard labour and a $60 fine. And there were other transgressions, if you like, while he was in the Air Force, including apparently in possession of whiskey and being drunk while on duty. He is a Scotsman after all, I suppose. And operating a private motor vehicle without a permit. So he got into a lot of bother and basically was discharged from the Air Force in, I think it was December 1959. He then he has a few jobs around California, uh, but he also had more trouble because he was arrested a few times for drunk driving. Uh, there was a potential arrest in 1961 for indecent exposure, and the charges were then dropped. And there's also a possibility that he attempted suicide in that period. So he had quite a few problems. But to cut to the chase, really, about how he got to Texas. In October 1962, he met a lady on a Greyhound bus, and this bus was traveling from Vancouver down the west coast, probably to Los Angeles. And he met this lady. She was from Texas, and he met this lady on the bus, and they obviously got on quite well. I think he had a bit of the gift for the gab because he had a few marriages in his lifetime. But he got on quite well with this lady called Frances Bernard, and they chatted away. He got on the bus in Seattle, and at the end of the journey, she carried on to Dallas, and Duff followed her out there a few weeks later, and they actually got married on the 5th of November, 1962. I mean, it's a bit of a whirlwind relationship when you think about it, because they'd only known each other for a few weeks and they met on a bus. So, nonetheless, he moved to Dallas. He married Frances on the 5th of November, 1962. However, he did tell her some things that weren't true. For example, he told her that he was an engineer that worked for Boeing, and he was expecting a big paycheck from them, about $800. That and a few other lies, if you like, aroused her suspicions, and she contacted Duff's uncle in California, who told Frances basically that he was a bit of a liar, not to believe really anything that he said, and she basically annulled the marriage after a few weeks.
Is this common of Duff from your research, where it would maybe explain some of the lying transitioning over to him seeing or hanging out with Oswald, or at any point seeing Ruby at General Walker's place?
It is quite common. The trouble with people like with Duff is, and there's probably a lot of them in the Kennedy assassination characters, if you like, is that they lie a lot of the time, but other times that when you actually check out what they're saying, uh, some of it turns out to be true. So there's some of the Duff story that when you check it out is true, and then there are other bits of the Duff story that you've just got no idea whether to believe it or not. Certainly, a lot of the people that he came into contact with would uh, would have you treat anything he says with extreme caution. In fact, General Walker was one of those people. So yes, can you believe Duff? It's difficult sometimes to really know what is true and what isn't. I mean, basically, though, after the marriage had been annulled, the lady Frances Bernard basically kicked him out of the house, and he was kind of out there on the street, basically. I don't really know between the time where he was kicked out of the house and he met Walker what he was up to, but basically he probably around about, I would say, early December 1962, because the marriage had been on the 5th of November and it lasted for about 3 weeks. So we must be now into late November, early December. According to Duff, and he told this to the FBI, he had read about General Walker. He didn't know anything about Walker before he went to Dallas. And remember, he'd only now been in Dallas for a few weeks, but he'd read about Walker in the newspapers, which is probably not unusual because I think Walker probably was in the papers daily, if almost daily. Uh, and he basically walked up to Walker's front door at the Turtle Creek Boulevard mansion that Walker lived in and chapped the front door. He said in one of his statements to the FBI, I think it was the FBI, that he recognized the house from the American and Texas flags that were flying out in front of the property. And according to Duff, he brazenly walked up to the front door, chapped the door. One of the volunteers at the Walker House answered the door. He said that basically he wanted to work for General Walker. Walker then came to the door and spoke to Duff on the doorstep and effectively said, "Yeah, you can come and work for me." He didn't offer him any pay. He basically just said that you can get some room, board, meals, and Duff's duties really were around looking after Walker, driving him to speaking engagements, just basically looking after him, doing some cooking, odd jobs around the house. And that's how Duff found his way working for General Walker.
Now, I guess what did you learn about his time working for General Walker? Like what did you learn that he did for General Walker? Like whether it's starting his car. I mean, was he a butler? Was he a houseboy? Was he someone that, took care of letters or information, planned tours? Because obviously Walker had his speaking event that's going to be going, I guess, in a few weeks or however long before he got fired. So I'm just curious what information could have Duff gotten from Walker during his time in his employment?
Yeah, I mean, Duff referred to himself as Walker's Batman. I don't know if that's a term that is known in the States. I certainly wasn't aware of it until I looked into Duff, but that's how he referred to himself, as Walker's Batman. And that apparently is a term that was used in the British Army for somebody who was assigned to like a high-ranking officer and basically looked after that officer's day-to-day business. So, as far as I know, with Duff's concerned, he did some cooking. Uh, I think his main job was really to drive Walker to certain speaking engagements. Apparently, he started the working day by unfurling the flags on the front of the house, and then he ended the day by bringing the flags back in. So that's about as much as I've got on what Duff actually did, because he wasn't there that long. As you say, Walker went out on, I think it was in February '63. He went out on the Operation Midnight Ride speaking tour, and so Duff had probably been with Walker for a couple of months at that point. What Walker did say in his Warren Commission testimony that he actually quite liked it, Duff. He thought he was an all right guy for what he was being asked to do. But he also said he wouldn't believe a word that came out of his mouth. He said that as well. But it seems that they got on quite well. I mean, it wasn't Walker who basically fired Duff or told him to leave. Duff was told to leave when Walker was out on the speaking tour. So there's a chance that Walker actually was not aware that Duff had gone until he got back from the speaking tour, which was only a few days before the assassination attempt.
Do you know who the person was that fired Duff?
It seems to me that it was a combination of Walker's secretary, whose name was Julie Connect. I think that's spelled Kenecht. I'm not quite sure if that's how you pronounce it, Connect, but that was Walker's secretary, and also Robert Surrey, who was like a business partner and quite a close acquaintance to General Walker. Of course, Robert Sur was the guy that was responsible for the wanted for treason leaflets that were passed around Dallas in the days leading up to Kennedy's visit. It seems as if they two were primarily responsible for getting Duff and showing him the door. From what I've been able to gather from looking at some of the documents, Duff would say that when Walker was away on like a tour or a speaking engagement, then he had free time. He basically, if Walker was out of town, then Duff really was free to do whatever he wanted. But that wasn't the way that some of the staff saw it. So there was some friction between Duff and other members of the Walker volunteer workforce, if you like. And that led to Robert Sur basically packing his bags and telling him to leave.
Now, why was he a suspect in the whole shooting? Was it because of the recent firing, or was there information that was passed on that made the police a little bit suspect? Because he is a foreigner coming outside and going to Texas, I would think that they would be looking at people that weren't either born in the States or had some type of travel background that caused them to leave the States.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, General Walker, on the night of the shooting, he basically wasn't able to tell the police of any suspects. He off the top of his head, he couldn't really point the finger at anybody. But the police started to do their investigation in the days following the assassination attempt on General Walker, and they did interview Julie Connect, the secretary, and they did interview Robert Sur, his kind of business partner, if you like, and they both pointed the police in the direction of Duff. I think Duff, I think, had left the house about a month earlier, so it was round about the 10th of March, and it was really they two who directed the police and said, you might want to check this guy out. They obviously thought he was a bit of a dodgy character, and left under a cloud effectively. Although I haven't seen anything to indicate that Walker was himself involved in firing Duff. It seems like he wouldn't have known about it. But it was those two individuals that basically got the police looking around at William Duff. They also asked, I think it was Julie Connect, said that the police might be interested in interviewing a lady whose name was Wandell Whitley. It's Whitley, because Duff had been engaged to her, and the engagement had been broken off only a matter of weeks previously. So they kind of like they basically just aroused the police suspicions and says, like, we think this guy's a bit dodgy. He might be a person of interest. And the police did follow up on that. They did interview Miss Whitley, and she did confirm that the engagement had been broken off only a matter of weeks previously. I think Duff had been borrowing money off her mother and things like that. So again,
How positive was General Walker on a description of anyone that could have taken a shot at him? I have the interview with him. It's is it the one from April 11th, 1963?
Is that a TV clip, or is that a...
We'll just play it. Still one I can find on Walker. You probably have seen this.
Yeah.
General, will you describe for us just what happened last night?
Well, the police from the city came in to investigate a rifle shot that was fired into the house, fired through the west window, and hit the sill and hit the wall across the room and went through the wall over the desk at which I was sitting. This happened at 9 o'clock last. Well, there's an enemy within this country, and of course it's the same enemy that represents the position that we should do away with the House Un-American Activities Committee, that we should destroy our local police forces, and that we should do away with our military forces. These are the you might say, the anti-Americans as far as our traditions, heritage, and Constitution are concerned, and there are plenty of them in this country, in spite of the federal government's position that there is no threat from within. There is a threat from within, and this is just further indications that there is a threat to our individual rights and liberties.
What do you propose to do now? Are you going to go out making out your tax reforms at that same desk, or doing work in your house as usual?
The House will continue as usual. There will be no change, except that we'll double our efforts in every area, and this only indicates the necessity for it. It's been interesting to note that as a result of our tour from coast to coast, there's been much response to what's been said on this tour. People are very much interested and quite upset across the land. It's very indicative that they are not being properly represented in Washington, D.C.
I think a lot of what he just said, I don't think it sounds more anti-communist rhetoric. And I mean, you can relate that to Lee Harvey Oswald, which I'm sure the Dallas police or whoever would have easily thrown that on there, but also Duff too, from being an outsider on his way in. So it's kind of like he doesn't have perfect information or any information on who took the shot at him, but he starts immediately relating it to some type of communist threat or some type of threat inside. And now you can translate that to even JFK. I mean, the way JFK was speaking at the time could have seemed like a communist. So it just makes this seem like, obviously he's a hard right winger, but a lot of what that interview does, it just seems a little bit more like a ploy. To not, he mentions his speaking tour once. I'm sure everybody promotes their book usually at the ending, but you know, he threw that out there because he's trying to kind of get this sense of patriotism out there. I don't know. That's just me reading into it, but.
Yeah, I mean, good old General Walker, you know, he never misses an opportunity to promote himself and promote his causes. I mean, it only a matter of hours previously, a bullet is supposed to have whizzed by his head, you know, but he seems quite composed there, you know, quite happy and composed and talking about his political agenda, so to speak. I mean, Walker really didn't have any idea who took the shot at him, if we take him at his word. I mean, certainly on the night, he was sitting in his back room and he was completing his tax returns. And I think he initially thought that the shot might have been, like a lot of people say, like a backfire or a firework or something like that. And when he realised that it was a shot, he ran upstairs. This is his testimony. He ran upstairs to get his pistol, and he grabbed his pistol, and then there was a window upstairs, and he looked out the window and he saw a car take a left turn and drive up Turtle Creek Boulevard. Now, that the timing of that would seem to me to be like a getaway. You know, that could be somebody in that car who is leaving the scene.
Did Duff drive or have his own car?
Yeah, Duff did drive. Yeah. In fact, he drove a lot of different cars by all accounts, probably borrowed most of them off people, but he certainly did drive, yeah. Unlike Lee Harvey Oswald, who we're told was not able to drive, although that's disputed by some people. But I don't think Walker wasn't in a position to see enough in terms of like a description of an individual, so he wasn't able to give the police anything like that. In fact, there was only one witness called, it was a teenager called Walter Coleman. It was the only person who, well, he heard the shot, but nobody actually ever saw the shooter or shooters. But Coleman did hear the shot, and he ran out the back garden and stood on I think his bike was leaning against the fence, and he leaned over and looked into the car park, and he saw two men coming from the alley where the shot was fired and then disappearing. Well, he saw one of them leave in the car, and that's probably the person that Walker saw, the car leaving.
At this time, there was a function happening at that church where that vehicle was kind of made with two different suspects or two different people. So is it I mean, does that create a problem with the whole scenario? Because you got to look at maybe they were just leaving the church, but we have a few suspects that said that they heard a gunshot and that they recall seeing either is it like a sedan car or something like a black car. So it makes it a little bit confusing because you would not be able to pick up any notes of Lee Harvey Oswald with that because either he didn't drive or I mean he didn't own a vehicle and he was painted as a lone assassin. I'm really not trying to repeat the same thing we did in our panel thing, but when you really examine the evidence or where Lee Harvey Oswald's name pop up, it doesn't pop up in the first investigation. It seems like it mostly comes on the second investigation. And even then, it's very little and light touch. It kind of just got added on.
Yeah, I mean, Oswald's name was not mentioned at all until after the Kennedy assassination in terms of the Walker shooting. So the police never investigated him. I've not seen anything to indicate that his name came up at all. So if it was Oswald, and I've got major doubts about that, but then he successfully, got under the radar for 6 or 7 months until his own death. But yeah, the church, it was a Mormon church that was adjacent to the Walker house, and I believe there was a gathering in the church that evening, and there is the potential that, and some people have said that perhaps the people that Coleman saw were folk who were just innocently leaving the church and going home after an evening there. I find that highly unlikely. Highly unlikely. First of all, Coleman heard the shot and must have been outside looking over into the car park within about 10 seconds. And that gives these individuals time to get from the lane to their separate vehicles. Also, I don't see why, if these were innocent bystanders, why they wouldn't have come forward and helped the police with their inquiries. Now, I think we had a conversation in a previous podcast about, well, would anybody really want to do that? Would anybody want to put their head above the parapet in terms of General Walker and his politics and an assassination attempt? Possibly not, but equally, if they were church-going individuals, then, why wouldn't they want to come forward and say, well, we were there that night. We can eliminate ourselves from your investigation. Nobody ever did that. To this day, we do not know who these two individuals were.
Have you ever seen the testimony of Captain O.A. Jones about the Walker shooting?
Yeah, uh-huh.
There's this one I kind of wanted to read because I think it's kind of important. Do you want to read it or I can read it?
You better read it because my accent might confuse people.
Yeah, I love your accent.
Yeah.
So it says, Captain O.A. Jones of the Dallas Police Department, Dallas, Texas, furnished the file to me for review concerning the investigation of a shooting which allegedly occurred on April 10th, 1963 at 9 p.m. at the home of General Edwin A. Walker, Turtle Creek Boulevard. This file reflected that at 9:10 p.m. on April 10th, 1963, a call was received by the Dallas Police Department from General Edwin A. Walker. Walker complained to the police that he was sitting at his desk doing some paperwork around 9 p.m. on April 10th, 1963. He stated he was in the northwest room in his house on the lower floor when he heard what sounded like a firecracker explode over his head. Walker saw a hole in the wall to the left of where he was sitting. Investigation by the Dallas Police Department reflected that a spent bullet was found in the next room, which was believed to have entered the window on the west side of the room after passing through the wooden frame of the window, passing by Walker's head and going completely through the wall. Walker was hit in the right arm between the elbow and wrist by what he believed to be, I don't even know what that word is. Slivers of the bullet, wood, or places of glass. Walker, realizing that what had happened, ran upstairs and got his pistol and called the police. This file further reflects that one Kirk Coleman at 4338 Newton Street, Dallas, Texas, stated that he was sitting in the back room of his house and heard what sounded like a shot from a shotgun. He stated he ran outside and pulled himself up over the fence in the rear yard, and he looked toward a church parking lot nearby by some unknown white male speed down the driveway toward Turtle Creek Boulevard, either as a 1949 or 1950 Ford sedan. The file reflects that another witness allegedly saw two men in the automobile about 30 minutes prior to the time of the Walker shooting and a good distance away. Now, it's this part here. It says Captain Jones stated that one William Duff, white male, approximately 32 years old, came to General Walker's home in early December 1962 and pretended to be an immigrant from Scotland. According to Jones, Duff stated that he was interested in the type of work the general was doing and wanted to help him just for a place to stay. According to Jones, Duff stated that he had only been in the Dallas area at the time for about 2 weeks and kept mentioning that he had to study all the time in order to obtain his American citizenship papers. Jones stated that Duff was a pathological liar, lazy, and would not work. He stated in March 1963 Duff was asked to leave the Walker residence. Captain Jones stated that Duff was brought to the Dallas Police Department, given a polygraph examination from which the Dallas Police Department came to the conclusion that Duff was not involved with the shooting incident at General Walker's home. Captain Jones stated that there had been no other suspects other than Duff and that the Dallas Police Department has been more or less at a dead end. He stated that it is difficult to investigate any type of matter where General Walker is involved, since Walker apparently does not know the truth from fiction and leads the police up many blind alleys. Yeah. That is really important. Mostly the last bits at the ending, because they concluded that Duff didn't take the shot and that Duff was the only suspect. Now, I'm guessing that was from the first investigation, not later when Walker hired two private investigators to go conclude the matter.
No, I think that probably... When's that dated again, Robbie? I'm thinking that's probably maybe late June or something.
It is... December 7th, 1963.
All right, it's December, right? Yeah, but that would certainly be the second investigation. I mean, basically what happened was after Connect and Surrey had pointed the police in the direction of William Duff as a potential suspect, and they had also spoken to this lady who had been engaged to Duff, they actually went and arrested him on the 18th of April, 1963. So we're talking about just over a week after the assassination attempt, and Duff was arrested. He was actually placed in jail. He was fingerprinted. He had his mugshot taken. But eventually he was released almost immediately. I mean, they really had nothing to hold him on. I don't know whether they expect that he was maybe going to give a confession or something like that, but they didn't get that. I've actually got somewhere. I've got the.
Well, they hooked him up to a polygraph examination, and apparently he passed it.
They did do that. Was later though. That was after General Walker hired these two private detectives to. So there's kind of there's certain sections to this. So this what I'm talking about is in the week following the assassination attempt that Duff was arrested. There was no polygraph at that time. They just brought him in. Probably maybe try to find out, does he know anything? Kind of suss him out. The arrest report said that he was brought in under swindle. So I don't really know where that's coming from. I mean, for me, I think they're more interested in the Walker shooting, but that certainly wasn't in the arrest report. It didn't mention anything about the General Walker shooting. But I do think they brought him in just to try and suss him out. Maybe swindle was a cover. I'm not sure. But anyway, on the 18th of April, he was brought in. He was arrested and had his mugshot taken, etc., and then released. And he was out. And that should really have been the end of the Duff story when you think about it. But in a sense, it's only really the beginning of the Duff story, because what happens next is that General Walker initiates a private investigation into William Duff because new information came to light that would indicate that he was perhaps involved.
Is this where Keister and Roberts got a tape confession from him admitting to wanting to shoot or going to shoot General Walker for a sum of money?
and so what happens basically is, if you want just the general background quickly, is at the end of May 1963, a lady calls the Walker household, an anonymous lady. She was not prepared to say who she was, but she said she had an urgent personal message for the general, and Walker wasn't available, but the person that took the call persuaded the lady to, to tell her what it was that she wanted to tell General Walker. And Julie Connect, who's the secretary, I think they must have had a wee wave at each other across the room, because she listened into the call. And this anonymous lady basically said that she had been in a meeting where Duff was basically, quote, tanked up on scotch. So he's had a few drinks, but he was bragging about being the person who took the shot at General Walker. He said that he was a communist and he'd been picked to do the job to incite an interracial riot and get the NAACP involved. He also said he had an alibi for the police, but it wasn't true. And also that during this, whatever this meeting was, he had disappeared for about an hour and he came back white as a sheet and scared to death. And he was also in trouble with the communists because he had failed to kill General Walker. So this was the anonymous telephone call from a lady saying that she had information that Duff had admitted to being the person that took the shot. We should add, actually, Robbie, that on the 13th of April, which is 3 days after the shooting, Walker was in his office and Duff appeared out of nowhere, bearing in mind that he had been dismissed over a month previously, and appeared at Walker's house again and told Walker that he was working for a trucking company at the time of the shooting, and he was in Phoenix, Arizona. I mean, he's volunteering this information, which I find a bit odd as well. I think you would probably maybe keep your distance, but he volunteers this information to General Walker that it wasn't me. I wasn't in town. I was in Phoenix, Arizona, working for a trucking company. And the Dallas police apparently had tried to trace this trucking company, but were unable to. So who knows? Who knows what, if that was the alibi that Duff was talking about. But following this telephone call from this lady, this anonymous call at the end of May, Clyde Watts, General Watts, who was Walker's counsel, but also a friend, Watts and Walker basically got together and hired a couple of investigators who were in Oklahoma City. They're Bill Keister and Cliff Roberts were their names. They had done some work for Watts' legal firm, I think some insurance work or whatever. So Watts got in touch with him and says, "Look, we're going to have to put our eyes back on William Duff here because we've had this telephone call." So they took the call seriously. The lady was all obviously quite persuasive, and they got these two investigators down to investigate William Duff, and they then carried out a 10-day investigation, which was quite interesting. Quite an interesting investigation. I mean, they had no idea whether Duff was involved or not, but obviously from that telephone call, there was a real concern that if Duff was still out on the street, could he try again, or could he point us in the direction of the people who actually did the shooting? So I think it was Cliff Roberts was the first one that arrived on the scene. He came down from Oklahoma, and he touched base with Julie Connect and General Watts, and he actually found where Duff was staying at the time, which was in a kind of quite a nice apartment complex called Hidden Hills, and only a couple of miles away from where Walker lived. And he got a house in the same apartment complex as Duff, and actually just was basically tried to befriend him. And it turns out that he actually went to a party, Cliff Roberts, in the complex. It must have been in the complex. He went to a party and Duff was there. Duff was at the party. Apparently, Duff was, I don't know how, he was egging people on, I think the word is that they use for a fight, and actually got in a fight, not with Cliff Roberts, with somebody else that the police were called. And so the police were called to the complex, and I think because Roberts' background in law enforcement, he probably had a word with the police and talked him out of taking any further action. Maybe explained to them why he was there and what he was doing. But for whatever reason, the police, they went away again. And then, according to the report that Roberts and Keister provided for General Walker, after the party had broken up effectively, Duff chapped Robert's door, and the two of them had like a late night chat and a few drinks. And I think that at that point, Cliff Roberts started to bring Walker into the conversation. And this was a great opportunity to find out, I've got the guy in my flat here. It's just me and him. Let's see if I can find out a wee bit more about if he knows anything. So Walker did bring up Roberts did bring up Walker's name. And whilst Duff didn't admit to taking the shot, he did indicate a dislike for General Walker and said that he would be willing to take a pot shot at him for a particular sum of money. So this sounded great to Cliff Roberts because he said, well, I know somebody who's got that kind of money, and the three of them got together and hatched this plan to assassinate General Walker, and Duff would be paid $5,000 to do the job. Obviously, Roberts and Keister were not serious about the offer, but Duff wouldn't have known that. So the Keister came down from Oklahoma City, and they got together, the three of them, and hatched this plan to assassinate General Walker. Keister and Roberts really just doing that to try and find out what can we get out of this guy. Is he actually going to go through with this? Is he going to be able to tell us anything about who actually did take the shot at Walker? Maybe admit it was him. So that got quite interesting. That they got to that point, and they got as far as all jumping in a car together. I think this was on June the 4th. They got in a car together and they drove from the apartment at Lewis Street, which is a couple of miles away, as I said, and they drove over to the Walker house. And it was basically like a little reconnaissance mission. And Roberts and Keister secretly recorded the conversation that they had. I've got a kind of like a printout of the conversation. A lot of it's just kind of, it's difficult to make out. It's probably a very bad tape recorder, a very bad tape. But there is I think it's about 20 odd pages.
I'm about to say, if you want to read some of it, or what you would consider the most important part, I was going to read this real quick while you can look for that. But this is going to be the testimony of Clyde J Watts. It literally explains exactly what you were saying. It says Clyde J Watts, and then if you go to the second paragraph here, it says he is a personal friend of Edwin A. Walker, Dallas, Texas, former General of the United States Army. He is presently sitting on legal counsel for Walker, like you said. He said in the spring of 1963, shortly after someone shot at Walker in his home in Dallas, Texas, Watts hired two private investigators in Oklahoma City to go to Dallas and attempt to ascertain the identity of the person who had shot at Walker. The investigators were Bill is that Krester or Keister?
It's Keister, Keester,
former member of the Oklahoma City Police Department, and Cliff Roberts, former Oklahoma State
Narcotics Bureau agent.
Yeah, the documents they can never copy them right, because if you look,
I know. They always like to make life easy for us.
Mm-hmm. During the investigation conducted by Keister and Roberts, information was received that one Bill Duff, a Scotsman who was at the time employed by Walker or Walker's staff, had allegedly
remarked maybe.
He was the person who shot at Walker. Keister and Roberts made contact with Duff without
disclosing their
identity. You want to read it? Go ahead.
Okay, I think I have read this before a few times, without disclosing their identity or capacity as private detectives, and offered Duff $5,000 to shoot Walker. Duff was interested in the proposition and discussed with Keister and Roberts a plan to shoot Walker. A tape recording was made of the discussion, and their recording, along with the results of the investigation by Keister and Roberts, was turned over to the Dallas Police Department. At no time did Duff ever admit to Keister and Roberts that he was the person who had previously attempted to shoot Walker. At the time Keister and Roberts were in contact with Bill Duff, he resided at 5420 Lewis Street, Dallas, Texas. Watts stated he has read in the public press that Lee Harvey Oswald's wife had reportedly stated Oswald was the person who had shot at Walker, and therefore he considers there is a possibility of some connection between Bill Duff and Lee Harvey Oswald.
And that's on this one right here. I'll read it. A long-distance telephone call from Miss Duff in which she stated that her husband had vital information in the case concerning the assassination of President Kennedy. A meeting was arranged on that evening at the police station in Chickasaw, Oklahoma. It was at this time that Duff, in the presence of his wife, related the information concerning the alleged association of Jack Ruby and General Edwin A. Walker. Agent Cantrell said he had taken Duff aside in an effort to establish the truth, pointing out that if the information were found not to be true, Duff could be the subject of prosecution. He invited Duff to reverse his story if it were not the truth, while maintaining the fiction to his wife. Duff insisted in its truth and volunteered that he would submit to a polygraph examination if desired. He requested that the polygraph examination await his discharge from the array on June 1st, 1964 on the grounds of fraudulent enlistment. He claimed to have been in the Air Force from December 1957 to December 1960 and had not so indicated when listing in the Army. Agent Cantrell advised he had been informed by Cliff Roberts, Oklahoma Crime Bureau, that Duff had been examined by psychiatrists at Fort Still, Oklahoma, and had been diagnosed as a pathological liar.
Yeah. Yep. So that takes us on a bit further, Robert. That's taken us about a year down the line. That page there, because after the Walker Keister Roberts investigation, they turned the tape over to the police. All the investigation that they'd done in the previous, few days, and that led to the police bringing Duff back in again. So again, they took it seriously enough to say, okay, let's bring the guy back in and talk to him again. Actually, before they had reported it to the police, the little investigation, Duff had actually went to the FBI and spoke to James Hosty, of all people. So that seems to me that Duff was aware that these guys were trying to entrap him effectively. It seems to me that perhaps if they'd given him the $5,000, Duff would have taken off with it. But I'm not convinced that he was seriously going to take another pot shot at Walker, because he went to the FBI and said, "I think these guys are trying to set me up." So, but anyway, the upshot of it all was that the Dallas police brought Duff back in, and he did undergo a polygraph examination. I've got the questions here if you want me to read them out. Let me put the glasses on for the eyesight's not getting.
Shit, I guess I need glasses. I couldn't even read the document.
My eyesight's terrible these days. So there's a police report. It's dated December the 31st, as it happens, 63.
Hey, it's my birthday.
Oh, is that your birthday?
Yeah.
Oh, that's coming up soon.
That's
Happy
New Year's
birthday
Eve.
when it
It's
comes.
New Year's Eve.
Hogmanay, we call it over here. That's what William Duff would have known it as, Hogmanay. But yeah, so the polygraph was conducted at 8 p.m. on June the 12th, 1963. So we're in that time zone, very much in that June 63 time zone where Roberts and Keister are carrying out this investigation. So there were 6 questions that they asked Duff. Number 1 was, do you have a grudge with General Walker He answered no. Did you shoot at General Walker? Again, the answer's no. Do you remember who you were with the night General Walker was shot at? The answer's no. Have you given information to anyone about the activity of General Walker or the layout of the house except the two men from Oklahoma? The answer is no. Have you owned or had in your possession a high-powered rifle since you have been in Dallas? He also answered no. And do you know who shot at General Walker? Answered no. So 6 questions, answered no to all of them. And basically,
And he passed that?
he did pass it. I mean, the report goes on to say,
Because he lied already in the third one. Did you share any information about General Walker outside of the 2 individuals that investigated you? Well, he shared it to his wife, apparently.
not at that point, because that was June. This polygraph was in June '63. He married again in February, I think it was, or January '64. So that's the wife he's talking about. At this point, he's not married. It's probably about the only time he wasn't married in that particular period. He had marriages that lasted a few weeks. But I mean, you could argue, do you remember who you were with the night General Walker was shot at? And he answered no. Well, he did tell Walker that he was in this trucking company, and he was in Phoenix, Arizona. And it was only about 6 weeks before this. So you would think he might remember, who he was with that particular night. The report goes on to say, taking everything into consideration, it was the opinion of this examiner that Mr. Duff was truthful on all of the above questions except question number 3. Question 3 being, do you remember who you were with the night General Walker was shot? Due to a lapse of time between the offence and the examination, this person seemed puzzled over the question, which could have caused the indication of deception. Due to the fact that this person answered the other questions with the truth, it is believed Mr. Duff was confused rather than lying. So he kind of gets out of that. They don't, they take he's passed the lie detector test, and he's cut free again. And at that point, the Keister Roberts investigation is over. As far as they're concerned, that's done and dusted. But I mean, do you want me to mention a couple of things? I mean, do you ever use the word gibberish?
Yeah, gibberish.
Yeah, gibberish. There's a lot of gibberish in the transcript of when they were driving around, Keister, Roberts, and Duff. I mean, the things that jump out to me is really that the plan was, if they were going to take the shot, they were going to take it from the creek, which is on the other side of the house. So the Walker shot, he was in the back room, and the shot came from the alley. Whereas this conversation is really talking about, well, if we're going to do it, we're going to do it on the other side of the house, and Duff's going to kind of lay down in the creek area and shoot from there. He also talks about, because he knows Walker, perhaps he can just walk up to the house, trap the door, for example, and just shoot him at close range.
Now, you say that, and it kind of leads to a couple questions here, but he was interviewed on January 25th, 1964. They got a full statement from him, and one of the things on the second page of the statement is this right here. It's in the Warren Commission volumes. But when he's asked about seeing photos of Lee Harvey Oswald, he said Duff said he had seen many pictures of Lee Harvey Oswald in the newspapers and is positive he never saw this person. He claims he has a very good memory for faces, although not for names. This is the part. He said many visitors, some of them queer people, came to General Walker's residence while he was working there, and he is quite sure none of the persons he saw there could have been Oswald. He stated he absolutely had no information concerning Oswald. Now, to the many claims about him neither knowing Jack Ruby or knowing Oswald, could it have been possible that if he would have talked about walking up to General Walker's residence and then just shooting them? I mean, is it common for Walker to answer the door by himself? I mean,
it seemed
that thing states that he has a bunch of queer people coming up to his house, and I'm like, I would think that with Walker's paranoia, and other things that come through other documents, he would have someone answer the door for him.
Well, all I can really say to that is that he did have somebody answer the door for him when Duff first approached the house in, like early December 62 when he got the job, if you like. How often he answered the door himself, I've really got no idea. But it does seem to me, though, that the house was a bit of a kind of a free-for-all. It seems that there were a lot of people coming and going. So, and actually, somewhere in the transcript, it does talk about, like, a lot of the time in the evening, Walker was in the house himself. So you could perhaps chat the door later in the evening and Walker would answer it. So I know it's a good question because you would think that after being targeted for an assassination attempt and being in the public eye and being a pretty controversial figure,
He had a
that he would
followers
have
of
some kind of
100,000 that attempted his rally or thing that he was steering up across country.
the Operation Midnight Ride.
Yeah, he had like
Yeah,
100,000 people or something like that. That was
that was probably in total because he did do a number of different stopped in a number of different cities, but he had a following. He was controversial, and a lot of people would not have liked what he had to say. So he was leaving himself quite vulnerable. Perhaps he had quite a significant service in the army, so he probably thought he could handle himself. Even though he was getting a bit older, and he wasn't afraid.
well, it
You know
definitely
what?
played into his paranoia, but it makes you wonder how many of those police dead ends that they called dead ends. I wonder if they weren't dead ends. I wonder if they were just areas or people that Walker pissed off that were he was trying to be like, there's this group you should investigate, this group you should investigate, this group you should investigate. They've had not have anything to do with the shooting, but they were just all these people that had either made threats, because I'm sure Walker received threats. I think he talked about it in plenty of documentation that we have in the National Archives about receiving threats from people, phone calls.
Yeah, he seems like the kind of person who probably received death threats on a regular basis, and maybe just poo-pooed them in a way. But certainly, the as far as that transcript goes, that they did talk about taking the shot from the creek and Duff disassembling the rifle and leaving it in the creek and things like that. But it's hard to make out a lot of it. One thing that did interest me is that the 5420 Lewis Street address, which is where Duff was staying for a period of time, and that's where when Cliff Roberts came round, the investigator, and stayed in that apartment complex. Their neighbour, so I think they lived in apartment 125. I think it was 125. And there was a lady that lived in apartment 123, or it's the other way around. I can't quite remember. But 123, apartment in 125 was a woman called Ingrid Carter. And Ingrid Carter worked, let's see, I've got that written down, but she worked at the bank that Ruby banked at. And she knew Jack Ruby. She actually gave evidence at the Ruby trial, Ingrid Carter. So you've got that little connection there of somebody who is like, they don't live down the street. They live in the same apartment complex, and they live like apartment 123, apartment 125, 125. And she works at the bank that Jack Ruby banks at, and she knew Jack Ruby. She used to give her Carousel Club cards. So I don't know if that's just a coincidence. Another one is at 5417 Lewis Street, which is just down the street, almost next door. That's where Larry Schmidt lived. Now, Larry Schmidt was another individual. He was in the army in Germany with Walker, and he moved to Dallas to try and start up a kind of right-wing organization, a big right-wing organization to, anti anything that the Kennedys stood for, etc. And his brother ended up being Walker's, you could call Batman later in 1963. So there's a lot of either coincidences or there's something more to it, because it just seems to me that the Schmidt brothers living next door to where William Duff lived, and then the General Walker connection between both of them. And actually, yeah, that's what I was going to say. In the transcript, he talks about some young guys. Since I can find it, I always bump into somebody who's a staunch supporter of his. There's a couple of young kids that I work with down there that are just out of the army. They served in the army with him, and they always tell me, I never have to ask. They always tell me. I think that's tell him when Walker comes and goes. So it's just speculation on my part, but are these young kids the Schmidt brothers, Larry and Bob Schmidt? Could be, could not be. I mean, I've got no evidence other than that and the fact that they lived next door to Duff at the time. There's just all these little interesting coincidences that appear in this case.
Do you know about the connection with Jack Ruby? Because I'm looking at a document from June 26, 1964, where James Contrail, of the special agent, talked about Duff claiming the identification of Ruby through photographs, having heard him addressed only as Jack, and describing something similar to Jack Ruby, and kind of him being in Walker's residence in his living room. I don't know if you know the full extent of the Jack Ruby information that Duff provided, and do you believe that that's real information or part of his lying?
Well, I do know about it, as strange as it may sound. I mean, what happened here is that Duff really went off the radar after that polygraph test. I don't think they were interested in Duff anymore. But then, after the Kennedy assassination, and obviously there's a big investigation is taking place. A restaurant owner, his name was Joe Loria, Loria. He was interviewed by the FBI, and he owned this restaurant, which was really just round the corner from the Walker house. It was only a couple of blocks away. You could walk it in like 10 minutes. And he said to them that he knew Duff. He called him Scotty. That was his kind of nickname. That's how they knew Duff, as they just called him Scotty. And it seems to me that Scotty was in this restaurant quite a lot, probably during the time when he was working for Walker, because I say it was only round the corner. And he said that this guy, Joe Loria, that owned the restaurant, said that about 7 or 8 months previous, now he's being interviewed in December, he said that he saw Scotty, who he knew, with a guy who he would bet money was Lee Harvey Oswald. Now, I mean, probably a lot of people were saying that they saw people with Lee Harvey Oswald at that time. I mean, Oswald had been arrested for the assassination and the murder of Tippett, and then had been murdered himself. So, it was big news. But Joe Loria said, no, I would bet money that I saw Scotty in the company of Lee Harvey Oswald. And that really got the FBI and the police and the Secret Service interested in Duff again. They started to say, right, well, wait a minute, we need to try and contact this guy again, because this restaurant owner is putting him in the company of the alleged assassin. So that's where they try and track him down again. And it turns out that they tracked him down eventually when he was in the hospital at Fort Mill? I think it was Fort Mill in Oklahoma. I mean, there's a lot of FBI documents in that time that are saying we can't find Duff. We don't know where he is. There's lots of documents that you can see in Mary Ferrell, etc., where they're saying we can't find the guy, but he was in the army. So, I mean, I don't know how hard it would be for the FBI to find an individual if he was in the army. But they did have difficulty locating him, but they did find him eventually. And that was in January 1964. That's when that Agent Cantrell goes into the army hospital to speak to him. And Duff basically denies everything. I'd never met Lee Harvey Oswald, never seen him. Don't know anything about Jack Ruby, never been in the Carousel Club. He's just denying everything. And they kind of leave it at that. And so that's January 64. But as we go into the kind of middle of the year, it starts to change again. And I think what happened is that the Clyde Watts and General Walker had suspicions about Duff again because Roberts was following Duff, and Duff recognised him. That this guy from about a year ago, who was trying to trap me, is now following me. And I think Cliff Roberts had Duff was married at this point, and Roberts had met up with Duff's wife and said that there were warrants out for his arrest, which wasn't true. So Duff got back in touch with that agent Cantrell and said, "Look, can you help me with my wife by telling her that there are no warrants out for my arrest?" Because that's what this guy Cliff Roberts is telling my wife. So they actually do get together, Duff, Cantrell, and his wife, and that's where Duff really starts to talk about Ruby and starts to say, well, actually, when I worked for General Walker, Jack Ruby did visit the house about once a month. So you're talking about December, January, February, maybe March. He saw him, and he starts to tell the agent that yes, there is an association between General Walker and Jack Ruby because I was working in the house and I saw Jack Ruby in the house. So it's getting back to that thing again about can we believe Duff? One minute he's saying, I don't know anything about Jack Ruby, never met him, never seen him. Now he's saying a few months later that actually there is a connection between Walker and Ruby.
What about when? Oh, I'm sorry.
I've just got to say, he does give a description of Jack Ruby. I'll read the description out, and you can let me know if you think this is Jack Ruby. A white male, American, 40 to 50 years of age, 5'8". So far, it sounds promising, but then we get to 125 pounds, very thin in appearance, and greyish white hair, wearing a business suit. Now, Jack Ruby was a lot of things, but I don't think we could ever describe him as being 125 pounds and very thin in appearance. But that's a description that Duff gave the investigators.
Did he talk about any others that convened in the same living room? Because it says Duff claimed identification of Ruby through photographs, having heard him addressed only as Jack. The others he described as follows: a white male, mid-30s, 5'11" to 6 foot, weighing 145 pounds, dark receding hair, said to be a member of the John Birch Society. And then number 2 is a white male in late 40s, heavy build, dark complexion. Duff advised that these 3 have always convened with Walker in the living room of the Walker residence. Duff at no time overheard their conversation.
No, anybody watching, if they've got any ideas as to who these people might be, I've got really no idea.
It doesn't even fit the people that they saw running into the car in the church parking lot.
No, it doesn't. I mean, that's one of the things about this story. When you get the descriptions that Coleman gives and that Duff gives and other people give, none of them seem to tie up. I mean, is it possible that people could wear disguises and things like that? I mean, if the people went out to take the shot, the people that Coleman saw, if that was those individuals, could they have put a wig on or something? I don't know, or changed, kind of like their appearance in some way. But no, it's difficult to know. I mean, at one point, the first time he said that Ruby visited the house with 2 men, and then later on, he then says no, it was actually only 1 man that Ruby visited the house with. So, he's changing his story on that, and it's difficult to know, what to believe. I mean, he felt that the guy Roberts, the Cliff Roberts investigator, was following him. So he might have been trying to get his own back on Walker and people like that, the Walker group, if you like. And that might be why he's bringing this up. He's just trying to stir the pot. Or he may be telling the truth. I mean, it's just impossible to really tell at this point. Uh,
When did he finally vanish from the police suspicion, and it then eventually became Oswald did it, or the way the media portrayed it, or however you want to say? Because then we can get more into you locating Duff as well too, or his final resting place.
yeah, I mean, it was really just kind of after this period of time. So you're talking about, July, June, July, August of 1964 is really when he went off the scene. I think they probably just gave up on him. They probably just thought, look, there's really nothing really concrete that we can take forward in terms of what William Duff is telling us. So after the kind of the the period of time, kind of June, July 1964, when he gets back in touch with a Secret Service agent and they're having this conversation about was it Ruby visited, was it not Ruby? He kind of goes off the scene, and I really do need to spend a wee bit more time trying to find out what happened to him when he went off the scene. Uh, all I've been able to find out is that he just, I've written this a little bit down. He got back in touch with Walker in 1971. He actually called Walker in July 1971 from a bus station in Dallas.
By the way,
And
I took the shot and then hung up the phone.
and then he hung up, yeah. If only he had said that, it would have saved a whole load of investigating, wouldn't it? But he didn't go that far. He
It'd be
called up
funny if
again.
it was something simple where he like Walker ate the lunch out of the fridge that was Duff's with his name on it, and he just
I
was like,
know
"That's why I
he's
took the
calling him
shot."
up about that all these years later. He's casting it up. But he said that he'd been in Alaska for the past 4 years. So 1967 to 1971, he'd been in Alaska working in construction. Who knows if that's true or not? But it could be found out, I suppose. Uh, and when he had been in touch with Walker, and he called quite late at night, Julia Connect, who was obviously, I don't know if she was still his secretary or whatever, but she warned Walker to keep the doors locked, keep the lights on, be wary of this guy. So this is like 7 years later. They're still concerned about him. Walker even, in Julie Connect's notes, she even thought that Walker thought that Duff might even have stolen his gun because his house had been broken into the Sunday after Easter and his gun had been stolen. So they were even worried that Duff had stolen his gun in the weeks before he made that phone call. But basically, Walker kind of sent him away and said, "Look, there's no money here for you. There's no job. There's no place for you to stay. There's nothing. I can't offer you anything." And I think Duff basically just said, "Look, I'm sorry to bother you." And then Duff disappeared again, disappeared off the scene, not for the first time. Uh, Eventually, I found out that he died in 1992. And on the 26th of April 1992. So there is a 20-year gap, 1971, 1992, where I could potentially try and dig away to find out what he was up to in that 20-year period. But he ended up in Clark County, which is in Las Vegas, and that's where he died all these years later. So I'm just quite interested in the guy because you can't rule out that he was involved in the Walker shooting. I mean, he said he was. He said he took the shot, but he said a lot of things that didn't turn out to be true. And he apparently he'd been drinking when he said it. So he might have been one of these guys. He liked to draw attention to himself. He liked to inflate his ego, inflate his, and exaggerate his importance. Uh, but not everything that he said turned out to be a lie. So it's just trying to kind of vet through it and decide what can we believe and what do we not believe. Something I always found quite interesting, Rob, because obviously we've spoke about the Walker shooting in previous shows, is that the police identified on the night the cartridge was a steel jacketed from a steel jacket, and it was a 30 caliber bullet, and obviously that's completely different from the 6.5 millimeter Mannlicher Carcano rifle that Oswald's allegedly supposed to have used. And something that's interesting, and it could be a stretch, but why not put it out there, is that when Roberts was investigating Duff back in June 63, let me get my months right here, June 63, in that apartment complex, he was in the house, in Duff's apartment at one point, and I don't know if Duff was in another room or he got into the house when it was empty. I don't know, but he got into the bedroom and he was in a closet and he found a shoebox. And in the shoebox, he found cartridges. Now, he said that he felt that they belonged to Duff because other things in the shoebox belonged to Duff. And he handed these cartridges to Clyde Watts, General Watts. And General Watts didn't think anything of it, put them in an envelope and stuck them in a drawer in his office. But when the Warren Commission were getting into their investigation, and I think it was around about June, July 64, Watts remembered about these cartridges, and he kept one of them, but he sent the other two to the FBI, and they were 30 caliber steel jacket cartridges, which would tie in with the ammunition that the police thought they found on the night of the shooting. Now, I'm not an arms expert or anything, so I'm making quite a big connection here, quite a stretch to make that link. And I don't want to point the finger at Duff too much on the basis of that, because on its own it really doesn't mean a lot. But it is still a fact that Watts had these cartridges in his possession that were found in a shoebox in Duff's apartment that apparently belonged to William Duff. It's just another little bit of the story that's quite intriguing.
On a wrapping point here, I kind of wanted to get your take on what people should take away from this episode when we're talking about examining the JFK case. Because obviously, when it comes to the Walker shooting, it's what everyone kind of points to is on the lone nutter side. That's the reason why he shot at Kennedy, even though there's not really evidence, or there is no evidence to say who took the shot at General Walker. And Lee Harvey Oswald was only put forward by Marina.
Yeah. Can I just quickly say, Rob, because about where Duff, I did find these remains, or where he was, where he's been laid to rest, if you like. I was in Las Vegas recently, basically on holiday. It really was. I wasn't there to do any Kennedy research, but as people maybe watching will know, you can't stop doing it. And because I knew that he had died in the Las Vegas area, and I was out there, I had tried to find out how he died, but Nevada records, death records, are not public in Nevada. So they were able to tell me who handled his funeral arrangements. So while I was in Las Vegas, I went to the place. It was the Palm South Jones Mortuary. It's a couple of miles off the strip. And I went in there and I gave them Duff's details. And as usual with Duff, it was a dead end, or at least it sounded like a dead end, because the lady at the desk didn't have any records. But the day afterwards, the manager had checked it out and told me that the Clark County Social Services had handled the disposition of the funeral. So I then contacted the social services, who originally again didn't have any records, but they emailed the county crypt, and they eventually got back and said that they had found where William Duff's remains were, and he was cremated, and his remains are in a crypt, an unmarked crypt at the Bunkers Edenvale Memorial Park. So if anybody's ever been to Las Vegas, like Fremont Street, it's about maybe 2 or 3 miles north of Fremont Street. So there were a few Uber trips while I was in Las Vegas that were not connected with the holiday. They were all about trying to track down William Duff. because the Clark County Social Services were involved, it would appear, therefore, that Duff died pretty penniless. He couldn't fund a funeral, and no family members came forward to pay for it or get involved in it in any way. So it sounds as if he died quite a sad. It was quite a sad end. If if we read into this, he may have been in Las Vegas, but he didn't appear to have a lot of money or any
Can't
family
always
to
bet
help
on
him out.
black, my friend. I bet
Well, that was it.
probably had a drinking problem. If he's calling Walker about looking for a job or looking for money, he probably
Yeah,
suffered from some type of something that was getting rid of all of his cash.
I think so. And he could have been a millionaire, and as you say, put it all on red and one night and then lost it all. But at least I was able to find where his remains are, because I think for all the ups and downs in his story, he's a compatriot of mine. He's found himself involved in the whole Kennedy assassination Walker mystery, and I felt it was doing him right to try and at least find where his remains are. And the lady at the memorial park said to me if any family were interested, they could come and collect his remains. It wouldn't be, I think there would be some cost associated with it, but if any of his family are watching and they want to know, well, I've just said, but they can get in touch and we can sort that out. But yeah, I mean, the Walker shooting, it's kind of like it's kind of like the forgotten part of the Kennedy assassination, isn't it? Because a lot of people even now don't know that much about it. I think you're doing a good job, Robbie, in your podcast, trying to bring out a bit more around the Walker shooting, because obviously Oswald was eventually the guy that was fingered for it. And to this day, you can go onto the internet, watch documentaries, and they basically make it as a matter of fact that it was Lee Oswald that shot at General Walker.
Well, it's like, show me what evidence concluded that Oswald took the shot. And it's either Marina's testimony, but there's no documents that state that he was even suspected of it.
Well, he wasn't. I mean, he wasn't suspected until there was a newspaper article in a West German newspaper in November '63. About a week after the Kennedy assassination, it was basically said that it was Lee Oswald who took the shot at General Walker. And then we have this note that is found a day or two later, a note that is found in a book that Ruth Payne had handed to I think it was the Irving police who handed it to the Secret Service, who was to pass it on to Marina. But out drops this note that is apparently written by Oswald back in April '63, although the letter's not signed and it's not dated and it doesn't mention Walker. And then Marina's confronted with the note and she denies any knowledge of it. And then 24 hours later, she says, "Oh no, that was the note he wrote the night he went out to shoot General Walker." So it all seemed to be quite convenient, the way it all lined up in such a short space of time, that Lee Oswald took the shot at General Walker. And I think anybody who's serious about researching these cases should really be honest with himself and say, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say that Oswald didn't take the shot at Walker. The fact of the matter is, I don't know. I don't know who took the shot. And anybody that says that they do know who took the shot, they're either disingenuous to the evidence or they know something that the rest of us don't know, because you cannot place that crime at Lee Oswald's feet based on the evidence that's been presented by the Warren Commission. It's just not fair to do that. And we've got all this stuff about William Duff. So he's somebody that merits more investigation in this regard. There's other people speculate that it might have been the Schmidt brothers. I mentioned Larry Schmidt earlier on and Bob Schmidt. Could they have been the two men that Coleman saw? I mean, at the end of the day, that might be unfair on them as well, because it's all just speculation. But it's important, I think, for this case to stay relevant and for people to keep looking at it, because too many people point the finger at Lee Oswald and say he shot at General Walker. He therefore has some propensity to political assassination and took the shot at Kennedy and shot Tippit as well. And I just don't think it's as straightforward as that.
Well, Scott, I do appreciate the work you have done when it came to regards of Duff and his background. I think it's important. I'm glad someone was able to at least give more information on the Walker shooting because, like you mentioned, it is an area that seems to be kind of less touched by researchers. And it's more just been kind of this accepted fact that, oh, Oswald did it, when really, if you examine it, there's not really evidence to support that at all. Um,
I mentioned, Robbie, just I know you're probably winding it up here, just very quickly about there was a neighbour of Walker's who lived in the next street, and his name was Samuel Gilbert. And Samuel Gilbert, his family, him and his family emigrated to America at the same time as the Rubensteins. And apparently Samuel Gilbert and Jack Ruby were good friends to the point where Ruby was visiting Samuel Gilbert's house. It's on Avondale Avenue, which is right next to Walker's house, on a regular basis between 1959, 1962, 63. Now, if Ruby's visiting the house on such a regular basis, to the point where he almost moved in, uh, is it conceivable that he also visited General Walker when he was there? I mean, I've walked it from that house to the Walker house. It takes about 2 minutes. It's a 2 minute walk, and half of that's actually waiting for the lights to change to cross the street so you don't get knocked over. So there's just those little kind of coincidences. Are they coincidences, or does it mean something bigger? There's a lot more to this, I think, than meets the eye.
is there a place where people can find your links, Scott?
Well, I don't have a book to plug like General Walker might have earlier on. So most of the stuff I do is on the Dealey Plaza UK YouTube channel. So that there are some presentations I've done on William Duff, also on Robert Barrett, the FBI agent, and another couple of things that I've been looking into that have got a Scottish dimension. I've got an article on the Kennedys and King website that's called the Kirk Newton incident, and that's a place just outside Edinburgh. It was an Air Force base, and they intercepted a message about an imminent assassination attempt on President Kennedy. So I've written about that, and I recently did a presentation. It will hopefully be uploaded soon on the Dealey Plaza UK YouTube channel, and it's about a lady called Lola Steenbarger, and she tells a story about sitting next to Lee Harvey Oswald, or A. Lee Oswald, I should say, on a flight from America to Germany. This is around the time when Oswald's defecting to the Soviet Union. So the flight stopped at Prestwick Airport, which is in Scotland. So that again got my interest, and it's an interesting story about a possible additional Oswald lookalike or imposter. So people look out on the Dealey Plaza UK YouTube channel. That'll hopefully be uploaded onto that quite soon.
Well, Scott, I'm going to link all your links in the description. The Dealey Plaza UK site as well, too. YouTube channel will be linked in the description. I do appreciate the time you've given me to do this podcast and many others. And I'd like to thank everybody out there listening. And stay tuned for our next episode.